All right, let's jump into another deep dive.
Mhm.
Today we're looking at something pretty cool, auditory supported air gesture controls for cars.
Well, yeah, that sounds pretty futuristic.
It does, right. And we're going deep on a 2019 research paper. It looked at how these systems work and how they stack up against, those touch screens we see in almost every car these days.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It gets even more interesting when you see the results about drivers' visual attention and how much mental effort these different systems take.
Hmm. I'm intrigued. Touch screens can be a bit distracting sometimes.
That's exactly what this research is trying to address.
Hmm.
You know how using a touchscreen while driving can be, well, pretty dangerous? Takes your eyes off the road even for a split second?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where these air gestures come in.
So how do they work?
The researchers designed a system where drivers use hand motions, like gestures, to control a menu on their dashboard. And here's the cool part. They get audio cues, so like specific sounds, that tell them where their hand is in the menu.
Oh, I see. So they wouldn't have to look at the screen as much.
Exactly. At least that's the idea. The audio kind of acts like a guide.
That's pretty clever. I wonder how well it actually works in practice, though.
Well, to test it out, they set up a driving simulator and had 23 people try it out. They had to interact with these menus that were set up in grids, like icons on your phone. Some grids were simple, with 4 large icons, a 2x2 layout, and others were more complex, 16 smaller icons in a 4x4 grid.
Oh, wow. 16 icons. That sounds like a lot to keep track of while driving.
Oh, it was. And to make things even more interesting, they had some grids with audio feedback and others without, just to see how it all affected the drivers.
So like a mix and match approach to see which combination worked best.
Yeah, exactly. They were looking for the sweet spot, and what they found was pretty fascinating. Those smaller targets in that 4x4 grid, man, they really threw people off.
I bet. It's gotta be tough to hit those tiny icons while you're focused on the road.
Oh, yeah, you can imagine trying to tap like a tiny button while you're going 65 miles an hour. Drivers using that 4x4 grid, they actually had more lane departures. They drove slower and overall just felt more mentally and physically taxed.
Makes sense. I guess people are compensating for the difficulty by being more cautious, like slowing down so they can be more precise.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
really highlights how even small changes in menu design can have a big impact on safety.
for sure. So what about the audio cues? Did they help?
Oh, yeah, the audio made a big difference. When they added those in, the number of times drivers looked away from the road went down, like significantly across all the different grid layouts.
Wow, so the sound really does seem to help people keep their eyes on the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you think about it, it makes sense. You're getting that audio confirmation, so you don't have to keep checking the screen to see if you're in the right spot.
It's like having a co-pilot guiding you without having to take your eyes off the road.
That's a great way to put it. Now, here's where things get a little bit more, well, tricky, I guess.
Yeah.
So while that audio helped with visual attention, it didn't actually improve driving performance like dramatically in this first experiment or how quickly they could complete tasks.
Hmm. Interesting. So it's not a cure-all then. Even if you're looking away less, maybe the mental effort of using this new system is still kind of taking a toll.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like maybe our brains are working overtime to make sense of this new way of interacting, even though we're not looking at the screen as much. It's like multitasking on another level, you know?
Right. Our brains can only handle so much at once, especially when you're driving.
Oh, absolutely. And then there was this other interesting detail. It turned out that certain spots within the driver's reach were harder to target accurately, even if they were physically close. So it wasn't just about distance, but like the location in relation to the driver's body.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. So it's not just about how far away something is, but also how your body is positioned.
Yeah, it's really about how easy it is to reach a certain spot. Makes you think about like the whole driver space, not just what they see on the screen.
Totally. That whole new way of thinking about interface design.
Absolutely. So this first experiment, it kind of lays the groundwork. It shows us that the size of the grid and sound, they both play a role in how drivers behave.
Right. But now the big question is, how does this new system compare to the trusty old touchscreen?
Exactly. And that's what they tackled in their second experiment. They took what they learned from the first one, that 2x2 grid with the audio feedback, and went head to head with a similar 2x2 touchscreen system. They even added a lead car to the simulation that changed speed every now and then, just to make things a bit more realistic.
Ah, so like you're driving on a busy highway, you have to adjust your speed, keep a safe distance, and on top of all that, you're trying to use the car's system.
Exactly. It was all about simulating those real-world conditions.
Clever. I'm ready to hear how it all played out. And when it came to looking away from the road, those air gestures with the audio feedback, They really shined.
Oh, in a good way?
Yeah. Drivers looked away way less than when they were using the touchscreen.
Hmm. That's a big deal for safety. It's like having a co-pilot.
It really seems like those hand gestures with the sound cues, they really help drivers keep their eyes on the road.
Like you said before, that's where they should be.
Right, exactly.
But I remember you mentioned earlier that the sound cues didn't really improve like driving performance in that first experiment,
You
right?
got a good memory. Yeah, that's right. And, something similar happened here too.
Really? How so?
So even though drivers looked away less when they were using air gestures with sound cues, their lane keeping wasn't as good.
So they were looking at the road more, but their driving wasn't as smooth?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it kind of throws you off. Like, it seems like using this new system, even though it means less visual distraction, it might still be affecting their driving a bit.
Like their brains are still trying to figure out this new way of doing things and it's taking away some of their focus from driving.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's just a matter of getting used to it.
That's what I was thinking. Like, we're all so used to touch screens these days.
It's true. It's like second nature to just reach out and tap the screen now.
Maybe with more practice, that little dip in performance would go away, once people get the hang of it.
It's definitely possible. I mean, this study really highlights how important user experience is, even if something is safer. It's got to be easy to use too, or people just won't use it.
True. It's got to be intuitive.
Exactly.
Speaking of intuitive, here's the thing that really surprised me. Drivers actually said they preferred using the air gestures with the sound, even though they were slower.
I know, right? That's pretty amazing.
Uh,
It just shows you how much people value keeping their eyes on the road.
yeah, they're willing to sacrifice a bit of speed for safety and peace of mind.
That's a pretty powerful
It
statement.
makes you think about the future of how we interact with our cars. As these systems get even more advanced, how much are we willing to change our habits to make driving safer?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Hmm.
And this research gives us some clues about what that future might look like.
Yeah, like maybe we're moving towards a future where we're interacting with our cars less with our eyes and more with our movements?
Right. And that's where this research is so important. It's showing us what's possible.
Now, even though drivers said they liked the gesture system more, the researchers found that the workload scores for the air gestures with audio and the touch screens were pretty similar.
Yeah, that's a good point. It shows just how much mental effort goes into multitasking while driving.
Yeah, it's not just about what we see, it's about what's going on in our heads.
Right. It's about how much brain power we're using to process information and make decisions.
So even if we're looking away less, our brains might still be working overtime to handle all these interactions.
Exactly. And that's something designers really need to think about as they develop these systems.
It's not just about taking the visual load off, it's about making sure the mental load isn't too much either.
Absolutely.
Now, to make things even more challenging, the researchers added that lead car to the simulation, remember?
Oh, yeah. The one that kept changing speed.
Yeah, exactly. It was like those unpredictable moments you get on the road all the time.
Right. Like when someone slams on their brakes in front of you.
Exactly. And they wanted to see how drivers would handle those sudden changes while they were using the new system or the touchscreen.
It's like they're really trying to put these systems through their paces, huh?
They were. And they didn't just look at like driving performance and eye movements. They also asked the drivers which system they liked better. And like we said, even though they were a bit slower with the gestures, they still preferred them.
It shows you that people get it. They understand that this technology could make driving safer. And they're willing to try something new, even if it takes a little getting used to.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to think about.
It really is. It shows how much potential there is for making driving safer and more enjoyable.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of details about both of these experiments.
We have.
But now I think it's time to step back and think about the bigger picture. What are the main takeaways here? What does this research tell us about the future of driving? For me, one of the big things that stood out was that these air gestures with audio, they really could make driving safer.
Definitely. Anything that helps keep our eyes on the road is a good thing.
Exactly. But as we've seen, it's not perfect just yet.
Yeah, it's still early days, right?
Yeah, and there's that balance between safety and, how quickly you can do things, and that question of whether using a new system like this might actually make driving harder in some ways. It's still kind of up in the air.
It's true. There's still more research to be done to figure out how to optimize these systems, make sure they're both safe and user-friendly.
And it's not just about the tech itself, right? It's about how it's designed, how it all fits together.
Absolutely. We need to create interfaces that make sense, that don't overload the driver with too much information.
It's a challenge, but it's an exciting one. It makes me think about all those sci-fi movies where people control their cars with just their thoughts. Are we heading in that direction? Like brain-computer interfaces for driving.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of research happening in neuroergonomics looking at how brain activity can be used to, monitor things like driver workload fatigue and attention.
Wow. So maybe someday we will be driving with our minds.
It's definitely a possibility.
So even if we're not controlling our cars with our minds just yet, this research is showing us that understanding how our brains work is super important for designing safer and more intuitive cars.
I totally agree. The future of driving is about understanding the human element.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into these auditory supported air gestures, I have a question for you,
Hello.
listener. Think about the features you use most in your car. The radio navigation climate control, would you be willing to use air gestures to control them? Even if it meant learning something new, what would it take for you to feel comfortable making that switch?
It's something to think about for sure as these systems evolve. It's up to all of us as drivers to be open to new technologies, especially ones that can help make driving safer.
This research gives us a glimpse into what the future of driving might look like, and it's pretty exciting. And that's a wrap for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to connect with us on social media. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those deep dives coming. Safe travels, everyone.